October 1944. The ancient German city of Aachen has been reduced to a pulverized wasteland of shattered brick, twisted tram rails, and choking gray dust. Inside the blackened bell tower of a ruined church, a veteran German sniper adjusts the optics on his Zeiss scope. He is a predator, trained in the precise mathematical art of decapitating enemy units. Through his crosshairs, he watches an American infantry squad slowly advancing up a rubble-choked street. He ignores the rifleman. He ignores the soldier carrying the heavy Browning automatic rifle. His crosshairs sweep over the gray helmets until he finds exactly what he is looking for. A man with a vertical white stripe painted on the back of his helmet. A man carrying a map case. A young lieutenant. The sniper controls his breathing, calculates the windage, and gently squeezes the trigger. The crack of the Mauser rifle echoes across the ruins. Down in the street, the American lieutenant collapses instantly, killed before he even hits the cobblestones. Up in the bell tower, the German sniper cycles a fresh round and waits for the inevitable to happen. According to decades of Prussian military science, a squad that loses its commanding officer in the middle of a firefight is a dead organism. The men are supposed to panic. They are supposed to dive for cover, scream for medics, and become entirely paralyzed until a new commissioned officer arrives from the rear to issue fresh orders. But the paralysis never comes. Less than 2 seconds after the lieutenant's body hits the ground, a gruff, grease-stained staff sergeant points a heavy, gloved finger at a ruined storefront. He shouts a single command. The American squad doesn't retreat. They don't freeze. They instantly bound forward, laying down a terrifying base of suppressing fire that begins chewing the brickwork of the church tower to dust. Another soldier seamlessly grabs the dead lieutenant's map case, and the advance continues without losing a fraction of a second of momentum. The German sniper is forced to abandon his position, crawling away in absolute bewilderment. His flawless decapitation strike achieved absolutely nothing. The head of the American snake was severed, but the body didn't die. It simply grew a new head in the span of a heartbeat. He is looking at a phenomenon that the German high command could never fully explain or defeat. They were fighting an enemy whose command structure wasn't a fragile glass pyramid, but a self-healing, blue-collar machine. To understand why the German military mind was completely baffled by this seamless transition of power, you must look at the deeply ingrained social hierarchy of the German army. In the Wehrmacht, leadership was an exclusive, aristocratic commodity. The German officer corps, deeply rooted in the Prussian Junker tradition, held an absolute monopoly on tactical thought. A German commissioned officer was the brain of the unit. He was educated in grand strategy and complex maneuvers. The enlisted soldiers, on the other hand, were viewed strictly as the muscle. They were expected to be brave, highly lethal, and completely obedient. The German system relied on the Führerprinzip, the leader principle. Orders flowed downward from an absolute authority. If that authority was suddenly killed in combat, a dangerous vacuum was created. A German corporal or private was not conditioned to suddenly assume the role of a tactician. They were trained to hold their ground and wait for a new officer to tell them what to do. The American military was built on a totally different sociological foundation. The United States did not have a military aristocracy. It was a nation of industry, and its army was built like a massive factory. And the most important component in that factory was not the CEO, it was the floor manager. The American military relied on the non-commissioned officer, the NCO, the sergeant. To the Americans, a sergeant was not just a disciplinarian who yelled at recruits in boot camp. The sergeant was the true, hardened backbone of the military. If the officers were the architects holding the blueprints, the NCOs were the foremen pouring the concrete. And crucially, the United States Army explicitly trained its enlisted men for absolute redundancy. Every American corporal was trained to know the sergeant's job. Every sergeant was trained to know the lieutenant's job. The moment an officer fell, the chain of command simply clicked one notch upward. To the Germans, Losing an officer meant losing the brain. To the Americans, losing an officer simply meant a sudden promotion for the nearest guy with stripes on his sleeve. Going into the war, the German High Command was well aware of the tactical importance of eliminating leadership. They actively wove this into their combat doctrine. German snipers and machine gunners were explicitly instructed to prioritize American officers, radiomen, and medics. They looked for visual cues: men carrying Thompson submachine guns instead of rifles, men pointing, men looking through binoculars, or men standing just slightly behind the main line. The German math was simple and ruthless. Kill the man giving the orders, and the conscript army of the American democracy will collapse into a frightened, leaderless mob. This hubris was based on a fundamental misreading of American culture. The Germans looked at the American GI and saw a civilian in uniform, a farmer, a mechanic, a schoolteacher. They assumed these men lacked the martial bloodline required to lead men under fire. They failed to understand that the chaotic, capitalistic, and democratic society of 1940s America was the ultimate breeding ground for decentralized leadership. An American draftee who had spent the last 5 years running a logging crew in Oregon or managing a shift at a Pittsburgh steel mill already knew how to manage men, improvise around broken equipment, and hit a quota. When the United States Army slapped sergeant stripes on these men, they weren't creating leaders from scratch. They were simply weaponizing the blue-collar middle management of American industry. This sociological clash collided violently with the horrific reality of the European theater. By late 1944, the life expectancy of an American junior infantry officer in combat was terrifyingly short. Second lieutenants, often fresh out of officer candidate school, nicknamed 90-day wonders, were being fed into a meat grinder. In the dense hedgerows of Normandy, the freezing Hurtgen forest, and the urban hellscape of Aachen, platoon leaders were routinely gunned down within days, sometimes hours, of arriving at the front. If the German theory of warfare was correct, the United States Army should have stalled out completely. The sheer attrition rate of American officers was so high that whole companies were routinely left with no commissioned officers at all. But the friction of combat revealed the ultimate cheat code of the American NCO Corps. When a green 22-year-old lieutenant arrived at the front line, he technically outranked everyone in the platoon. But the unwritten rule of the American Army was that the veteran platoon sergeant actually ran the war. The seasoned sergeants kept the young officers alive, taught them how to read the terrain, and translated their textbook orders into pragmatic, violent action. When that young lieutenant inevitably stepped on a mine or caught a sniper's bullet, the bureaucratic paperwork of the Army might have been disrupted, but the lethality of the platoon didn't drop a single %. The sergeant simply picked up the lieutenant's radio, keyed the microphone, and said, "6 is down, I'm taking over." The German defenders, hunkered in their concrete bunkers, would watch their snipers successfully kill the American commander, only to find the American squad attacking with even greater speed, aggression, and tactical fluidity 5 minutes later. The absolute resilience of this system was forged in blood during the bloody street fighting in Aachen, the first major German city to be assaulted by the Allies. Picture an American infantry company from the 1st Infantry Division pinned down in a massive, bombed-out rail yard. They are taking withering fire from a reinforced German blockhouse across the tracks. The American company commander, a seasoned captain, stands up to direct mortar fire and is instantly killed by a burst from an MG-42. The executive officer, a first lieutenant, rushes to pull the captain's body into cover and is hit by shrapnel from an 88mm artillery shell. In the span of 60 seconds, the 2 highest-ranking men on the battlefield are dead. The radio operator is screaming into his handset for orders. The German commander inside the blockhouse sees the American leadership fall. He orders his men to prepare for a counterattack, confident that the Americans are paralyzed, leaderless, and ripe for destruction. But behind the American lines, a 24-year-old first sergeant named John doesn't wait for a new captain to be sent up from battalion headquarters. He doesn't call a retreat. He looks at the pinned-down men, assesses the geometry of the rail yard, and takes absolute control of the battlefield. He grabs a corporal and tells him he is now the squad leader. He points to a private and tells him to grab the bazooka. He physically drags the radio operator behind a rusted train car and calls in a blind artillery strike directly onto the German blockhouse. He doesn't ask for permission. He demands fire support. As the American artillery shells slam into the German position, the first sergeant stands up in the open, kicks a hesitant rifleman in the boot, and screams for the platoon to advance. The American infantry surges forward, not because a formally educated, aristocratic officer ordered them to, but because a guy named John from Chicago, who was working in a meatpacking plant 3 years ago, told them that the only way to survive was to kill the men in the bunker. They overrun the blockhouse in 10 minutes. When the surviving German officer is pulled from the rubble, he demands in broken English to surrender his pistol to the highest-ranking officer present. The first sergeant, covered in brick dust and carrying a Thompson, steps forward, wipes the grime off his 3 chevrons, and takes the pistol. The German officer is utterly humiliated. His elite, strictly regimented unit was just eradicated by a leaderless mob commanded by a factory worker. Following the war, as Allied intelligence officers interrogated the highest echelons of the German military command, a recurring theme of profound frustration emerged. Generals who had spent their entire lives studying the grand campaigns of Frederick the Great and Napoleon admitted that they could not calculate the behavior of the American infantry. They had spent millions of bullets successfully targeting American officers, only to realize that decapitating an American platoon was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. The Germans had built an army that resembled a magnificent, complex pocket watch. It was precise, brilliant, and deeply sophisticated. But if you smashed the mainspring, the officer corps, the entire watch stopped ticking. The Americans had built an army that functioned like a swarm. You could swat the lead element out of the sky, but the swarm didn't care. It just closed the gap and kept moving forward, guided by a deeply ingrained cultural instinct for aggressive problem-solving. The German elite could never explain how American soldiers kept fighting without their officers, because they failed to understand the power of a democratic society mobilized for war. They believed leadership was a privilege bestowed by birth and education. The Americans proved that leadership is simply the willingness to step into the blood and the mud, pick up the radio, and say, "Follow me," no matter what rank is pinned to your collar.